Some big news out of Fulton County, Georgia. Judge Scott McAfee has announced that all court proceedings in the case against Donald Trump and his 18 other co-defendants will both be live streamed and televised. The judge will also allow members of the media to use cell phones and computers in the courtroom. And I should note that I will also be live streaming these trials since they're allowed to be live streamed. So if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, please subscribe to stay on top of everything that happens in that courtroom. Now, this decision by Judge McAfee comes in contrast to the federal court proceedings in both Washington, D.C. and Florida, where we have not yet gotten any indication as to whether or not they would be televised. We should also remember that Trump allies have already begun the process of seeking to have the Fulton County case removed to the federal court system, where, again, we've thus far not seen the same degree of transparency. For example, in this week's hearing on whether former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows would have his case transferred to federal court, according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, journalists were barred from bringing cell phones, laptops, and cameras into the Richard B. Russell Federal Building. Of course, there still is the possibility that those federal trials could be televised. I spoke to former federal prosecutor and my co-host for the Legal Breakdown, Glenn Kirschner, about the D.C. case in particular and whether we may see that trial televised given its historic nature, and here's what he had to say. Is there any chance that that trial could be televised?
I actually think there is a better than 50% chance. Here's why I say that. You can make the equitable arguments, right? The equitable arguments, not arguments based on the law, would be, listen, this is the most important criminal trial in our nation's history. I feel comfortable saying that. And the American people really have not only a right to know, but a need to know, because they're going to be making their life decisions based on what happens in the courtroom. They're going to be making their voting decisions based on what happens in that courtroom. And we need to see this trial, because if we don't, you know what's going to happen? Donald Trump's defense lawyers are going to step to the cameras at the end of every trial day, and they're going to put disinformation, propaganda, and outright lies into the public square. They're going to talk about how, oh, again today, the prosecution's evidence fell apart, proving once again, this is a witch hunt. This is political interference. You know what Jack Smith's team of prosecutors will say at the end of every day?
Nothing.
Nothing. They will say nothing, because they're not permitted to speak about a trial while the trial is still ongoing. Which
creates a vacuum that's going to be entirely filled by Trump and his allies.
And it will be a one-sided fight. It will be, the DOJ fighting with one arm tied behind its back. That's another equitable reason that the American people should get to see the evidence with their own eyes, rather than relying on what anybody says about it, including mainstream media. We need to see it for ourselves. Here's the legal reason, the statutory reason that I believe cameras may have to go into the courtroom. There's something called the Crime Victims' Rights Act. It's the Victims' Bill of Rights. It's a federal law, and it gives victims statutory rights in court proceedings. Now, you might say, well, who are the victims here? This is the beauty of it, and I expect we may even see a legal suit filed along these lines. The courts have decided that in voter fraud cases, particularly things like a conspiracy to deprive people of their voting rights. Sound familiar? It should. That's count 4 of Donald Trump's indictment in Washington, D.C. The courts have said, regarding that crime, the voters are the victims. Well, guess what? The Crime Victims' Rights Act gives we the people, the American voters, the statutory victims, the right not to be excluded from the courtroom, the right not to be excluded from the trial proceedings. If the trial is not televised, we will all be excluded from the proceedings. That is not a stretch of the law. That is a heartland argument that is supported by the Crime Victims' Bill of Rights. It's paragraph number 3 in the 10 rights that are enumerated in that federal law. So I think we're going to see a groundswell, both equitable and legal, for cameras in the courtroom. And I kind of like the odds of cameras ending up in the courtroom at the end of the day.
Glenn, who makes that request and who grants that request?
So there is an organization called the U.S. Judicial Committee. It's headed up by Chief Justice Roberts. So it would be a vote of the committee members. And then I think it would ultimately come down to Chief Justice Roberts saying yay or nay. I don't know everything about the bylaws and the precise ins and outs of the voting procedures, but it will be largely up to that judicial conference as headed up by Chief Justice John Roberts.
Okay. But look, even if we don't see the federal trials televised, it's not like the Fulton County court proceedings are in any way less important. In fact, this prosecution poses a particular danger to Donald Trump because the Georgia prosecution is for state crimes. And even if Donald Trump is successful in his long-shot Hail Mary bid of winning the presidency and then using the levers of government to evade accountability for himself in those federal trials, he wouldn't be able to do anything to shield himself from state crimes. And let's be clear, these state crimes are no joke. Trump alone is contending with 13 criminal charges in a sprawling RICO indictment. The fact that this trial will be televised should be the least of his worries. Granted, Trump will still lose his mind because he's less worried about a court of law than he is the court of public opinion. Trump's whole shtick is to frame himself as the victim here, and so he'll take to Truth Social and whine about the corrupt prosecutors and the biased judges and the unfair jurisdictions and the vengeful witnesses because he wants the Republican base to see him as a martyr, and then he hopes they'll be more inclined to vote for him or support him because of the extent to which he's being picked on by everyone else. Tell you what, for a party that prides itself on being alphas, they sure do wallow in self-pity an awful lot. And of course, the reason is obvious. Trump has no defense. He knows he can't win on the merits, and so he has no choice but to wage this coordinated disinformation campaign with his allies in the media and in government, framing him as the victim. If he had a valid defense, he would present it. But instead, it's nothing but lies about non-existent fraud and lies about what the Constitution says and lies about these valid and warranted prosecutions being partisan witch hunts. Again, if the facts were on Trump's side, he would present them. The fact that he can't should tell you everything you need to know. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to this channel and do your part to help grow the progressive media ecosystem. I don't do sponsorships or paid ads, I won't ask for money, but just subscribing to this channel goes a really long way and it helps get the message out to more people. The subscribe button is right here on the screen. You can also subscribe to my Spanish language channel, which I made to reach those crucial Spanish-speaking voters. That link is on the screen too. And finally, if you want to listen to my audio podcast, you can follow that link as well. Thanks so much for watching.